the collector's lover. Lucian Knight lived in a mansion that loomed over the coastal cliffs of Maine, a Gothic masterpiece perched on the edge of the world. Inside, it was a labyrinth of shadowed halls and velvet-draped rooms, each adorned with the macabre relics of lives lost and darkness embodied. Lucian was a collector, but not of art or jewels. His obsession lay with the grim remnants of serial killers, bloodied knives, handwritten letters, cryptic maps scrawled in the perpetrator's hands. These items spoke to him, not as trophies but as fragments of twisted humanity he sought to understand. Despite his wealth and striking looks, Lucian kept to himself. He was a recluse by design, his dark passion making meaningful relationships impossible. That was until Evelyn Harper stepped into his life. The encounter. Evelyn was unlike anyone Lucian had ever met. She was warm, spirited, and confident, an art historian who specialized in the grotesque and surreal. They met at an exclusive gala, where Evelyn was presenting a piece on the intersection of art and mortality. Lucian had attended on a whim, his usual disdain for crowds momentarily overridden by curiosity. Her presentation captivated him, as did her presence. She had a way of speaking that drew people in, her fiery red hair and piercing green eyes commanding attention. Lucian found himself lingering in the gallery long after her talk ended, observing her from the shadows as she charmed the other guests. When their paths finally crossed, Evelyn was the one to strike up a conversation. "You seemed quite taken with the exhibit," she said, her voice tinged with amusement. Lucian allowed himself a rare smile. "Mortality is a subject close to my heart." Evelyn tilted her head, intrigued. "I'm Evelyn Harper." "Lucian Knight," he replied, taking her hand. A growing connection. Over the following weeks, Lucian and Evelyn grew close. They spent hours discussing art, philosophy, and the darker facets of human nature. Lucian found himself drawn to her wit and intellect, and for the first time in years, he began to imagine a life beyond his collection. But he hid his true nature from her. He couldn't bring himself to reveal the locked wing of his mansion where his treasures lay. Instead, he presented himself as a reclusive philanthropist with a passion for rare antiques. Evelyn, for her part, seemed content with his reserved demeanor, though her curiosity occasionally flickered in her eyes. One evening, as they strolled through the gardens of his estate, Evelyn stopped and turned to him. "You're an enigma, Lucian," she said, her voice soft. "I feel like there's so much you're not telling me." Lucian hesitated, his heart pounding. He wanted to tell her everything, to share the truth of who he was. But fear held him back. "Some things are better left unsaid," he replied, his voice heavy with regret. A discovery. Evelyn was not the type to let mysteries lie. Her instincts as an art historian drove her to question and uncover. Late one night, while Lucian was away on business, her curiosity got the better of her. She ventured into the locked wing of the mansion, using a spare key she had found. The air was colder here, the darkness deeper. Evelyn's footsteps echoed as she walked, her heart pounding with both excitement and trepidation. The first room she entered stopped her in her tracks. Glass cases lined the walls, each containing an object more disturbing than the last. A rusted knife with a dried smear of blood. A tattered doll missing an eye. Letters scrawled in spidery handwriting, their contents chillingly devoid of remorse. Evelyn's breath caught as she realized what she was looking at. This wasn't an ordinary collection. These were artifacts of violence and death, pieces of history steeped in horror. And yet, she wasn't repulsed. Instead, she felt a strange, unsettling fascination. The confrontation. When Lucian returned home, Evelyn was waiting for him in the study, her expression unreadable. "You lied to me," she said, holding one of the letters she had found. Lucian froze, his usual composure shattered. "Evelyn, I can explain." "You don't need to," she interrupted. "I've seen enough to understand." Lucian braced himself for her condemnation. for the end of what had become the most meaningful connection of his life. But Evelyn surprised him. "I don't agree with what you've done," she said, her voice steady. "But I think I understand why you do it. You're trying to make sense of something senseless, to find meaning in chaos." Lucien stared at her, his heart aching with relief and disbelief. "You're not afraid?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, but I am concerned. This collection, it's dangerous, Lucien. Not just because of what it represents, but because of what it's doing to you." The breaking point. Their relationship deepened in the weeks that followed. Lucien opened up to Evelyn, sharing the stories behind his collection and the inner turmoil it caused him. Evelyn, in turn, challenged him to see beyond his obsession, to focus on the life he could have instead of the darkness he had surrounded himself with. But the shadows of his past were not so easily escaped. One night, a break-in shattered the fragile peace they had built. Lucien awoke to the sound of shattering glass and rushed to the locked wing, finding two intruders rifling through his collection. Evelyn, who had followed him, froze as one of the men turned, brandishing a knife. "Stay back!" Lucien shouted, his voice a mix of fury and fear. The intruder lunged, and Lucien fought him off with a ferocity that shocked even himself. The struggle was chaotic and brutal, but in the end, Lucien managed to overpower the man. The second intruder fled, leaving the mansion in disarray. Evelyn rushed to Lucien's side, her hands trembling as she checked him for injuries. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice breaking. "So could you," Lucien replied, his eyes filled with anguish. "And it would have been my fault." The decision. The break-in was a turning point. Lucien realized that his collection, no matter how carefully curated, posed a danger to those he cared about. For the first time, he questioned whether his obsession was worth the cost. With Evelyn's support, Lucien made the difficult decision to dismantle his collection. He donated many of the artifacts to museums under strict conditions, ensuring they would be used for educational purposes rather than sensationalism. The most dangerous items were destroyed, their dark histories erased. It was a painful process, but with each piece that left his possession, Lucien felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. A new beginning. Months later, the mansion had transformed. The locked wing was now a sunlit gallery filled with Evelyn's favorite pieces of art, a space that celebrated beauty instead of darkness. Lucien and Evelyn stood together in the newly renovated room, their hands entwined. "I never thought I'd feel this free," Lucien admitted, his voice tinged with wonder. Evelyn smiled, her eyes shining. "You freed yourself, Lucien. I just helped you see the way." Their journey hadn't been easy, but it had brought them closer than either could have imagined. Together, they had faced the shadows of Lucien's past and emerged stronger, their love a beacon of light in a world that often felt so dark. And for the first time in his life, Lucien Knight allowed himself to hope for the future.